Now, the row over Angela Rayner's council house refuses to go away. The former head of Parliament's standards watchdog, Alistair Graham, has called for a full police investigation to determine if Labour's deputy leader broke the law. Joining me now to discuss this and plenty more on the political side is political correspondent at The Spectator, James Daly. Good morning to you, James.
Morning, Julia.
Thanks very much for joining us. Now, I mean, this story has been around for quite a long time. This is from Lord Ashcroft, his book, Michael Ashcroft's book about Angela Rayner, Red Queen. I went to the book launch, sadly. She was not there, unfortunately. I think there were probably too many Tory scum there in the room. But it just won't go away. Can you just explain, can you Janet and John this for us, what the actual claims are about her sale of her council house many years ago?
Sure. So this is about the sale of Angela Rayner's council tax home in 2015. And there are three allegations concerning about this, one of which is that where was she actually living at the time she was supposedly at this residence? Because obviously, if you have two residences, as is the implication from this book published by Lord Ashcroft, you have to pay capital gains tax on the secondary residence, which isn't when it's sold. So the question is, when she was living at this residence in 2015, was it her main one or not? If it wasn't her main one, then she should have paid capital gains tax of around £1,500 on it. That's the first thing. The second thing is if it wasn't as a primary residence, under right to buy, because it was a former council tax house, there are certain liabilities. For instance, that if you sell it within a certain amount of time, you have to pay more money back to the local authority. And the third thing is, was she making accurate declarations in electoral law about her registered property, because she declared on various electoral registers that her house in Stockport was her main residence. But in fact, if she was living at a secondary place, which according to reporters, they went around there and local residents there say that she never lived in the primary residence at the time.
Some of the language is quite fruity. They said one of them called her an effing liar.
Absolutely. And so hang on a sec. You've got local residents in Stockport in Greater Manchester saying, no, actually, how she claims to be living at, she wasn't living there at the time. And also, her brother was supposedly living there, according to the allegations in the book, and referred to her as her landlady. So hang on a sec. Who was actually living at this residence or not? And the fact is, Julia, the reason why this is going on for 2 months now is because she simply cannot answer the questions or publish the advice according to various press conferences she's been given.
Yeah, I mean, this is the interesting thing, isn't it? So she avoided doing interviews for a very long time, and then eventually she's done some. But she said, look, she's had advice, but previously she has called on other people on the Tories to publish their advice when they've got it, and now she's being something of a hypocrite either way. Now, does any of this really matter? Because people will say, it's a long time ago, there's a woman who pulled herself up by her bootstraps from a very hard upbringing, was a single mum as a teenager. She's done well in life. But a lot of people would have tried the same. Some people would be saying, doesn't really matter. Shouldn't we be worrying about, the billionaires not paying tax rather than a woman, making her way? I mean, a lot of people would argue that.
Well, I think this has inhibited some Tories from making this that case. But the rejoinder to that, of course, Julia, is that Greater Manchester Police consider there's enough evidence to reassess their decision not to investigate, open a police investigation.
Well, they didn't actually do a proper investigation. That's when then they were asked by the local MP to actually do a proper investigation. This is the problem with the police. They say, we've investigated. No, you haven't. You haven't spoken to anybody. You haven't looked at any paperwork. Of course you haven't found any evidence.
Yeah, and they haven't sent people around to their address. And of course, if all the local residents are saying she ever lived there, that's pretty strong evidence, you'd think, wouldn't it?
Yeah, you would have thought, wouldn't you? Well, of course, I mean, that's a bit of, Labour problems at the current time, although I'm not sure that Keir Starmer would be that bothered if he had to lose Angela Rayner as his deputy leader. I'm pretty sure. He has, though, lost some councillors today over his stance on Gaza. Gaza is still, rearing its head over the party. However, I suppose it's Rishi Sunak who still faces the biggest woes. 20 points routinely behind in the polls. Reform creeping up and up in the polls. Lots of talk now. I think Michael Gove, the Housing Secretary, has hinted at a November election. They're going to try and push it as late as possible. What do you make of how things stand for the Tory party and in particular for Rishi Sunak right now?
Well, I think this is about the battle for the narrative, really. I think Rishi Sunak in the past 100 days has faced 4 by-elections, each of which has been lost. And I think they want to try and get out at least a kind of pattern of 3 months where nothing really goes too badly wrong. And of course, they're going to struggle to do that with the May elections next month. I know. So it's going to be a very difficult 4 weeks for the Prime Minister, because I think a lot of Tories are preparing to move against him after those May elections. And so I think it's no surprise in those circumstances you're seeing talk of an October or a November general election, really, Julia.
But there's still been this threat that he could just go to the Queen, apologies, the King at any time and just say, please dissolve Parliament. And there's talk about, there's maybe 20 letters that have gone into the 1922 committee. 53 is the number they need to get over to get a vote of no confidence in him. But that he could just call an election as soon as that number hits, but they want to do it electronically so he wouldn't have time. I mean, the machinations of this, who knows how it would work out, what the rules change, depending on who wants to change the rules. But the reality is, I mean, whatever happens, whether the election is in June or in October or November or even next January, which it legally could wait until, no one thinks that the Tories are going to win the election. Everything now is about how badly they lose the election. How big a role does the Reform UK Party play in that?
A major role. There was a big poll out yesterday showing that they could cost the Tories 50 seats while also not winning a single one themselves. And I think we have to remember, Julia, of course, last time, one of the reasons why Boris Johnson got a majority of 80 was partly, of course, because the Brexit Party didn't stand in those southern seats, which the Tories were targeting, already held. But the second thing, of course, you've got to remember is that the majority of 80 would have been even bigger if the Brexit Party hadn't stood in places in the Red Wall area, like Yvette Cooper's seat, for instance, like Ed Miliband's seat of Doncaster North. So I think we really haven't seen yet what a potential rival party on the right wing of British politics can do, especially if those polls are accurate. It's a big if, but they're 15 to 18 points. That's how we have to wait and see how they'll do.
But is there any way that Rishi Sunak can sort of bring it back? I mean, I'm wearing this T-shirt, this woman, adult, human, female T-shirt today. We've got the culture wars. I'm not sure. I mean, that's a big issue for me and lots of other women, I think, but perhaps not going to be the defining issue for people who, their heating bills have just gone down, but their council tax just gone up by 5%. We saw these astonishing figures on the waiting list, the NHS, 250 people dying every week, according to Royal College of Emergency Medicine, because they're not being seen quick enough in A&E. People waiting a month to see their GP routinely now in many areas. And then you've got the Channel migrants that we've seen, I mean, extraordinary, a record number of people coming over in the first 3 months, more than 5,000. I mean, these figures are, everything other than inflation is going in the wrong direction for the Prime Minister.
Absolutely. And I think this is the kind of self-defeating narrative that we actually have, of course, which means that because they're 20 points behind the polls, everyone then stops going for those kind of 50-50 balls and attacking the opposition on things like the Rayner story. Just on your T-shirt, Julia, I would just say about the issue concerning the hate crime bill, which is, of course, that the Scottish Labour voted for it. And yet you have Pat McFadden, Labour in the UK spokesman out today, suggesting that they wouldn't have voted for this in Westminster. Well, hang on a sec. Look, Labour is saying one thing in Scotland and doing one thing in Scotland, and yet it's saying another in Westminster. So there are concerns about the opposition too. And in terms of the big problems facing Britain, I completely agree with all your analysis so far. It's going to be very difficult for anyone, even the most gifted of politicians, to turn this around. And at the moment, Rishi Sunak, unfortunately for him, doesn't look like he is anywhere near that.